Hi, y'all. This is Candace with Slusher Home Care Consulting. And today's video, we're going to talk about when families are complicating caregiving, when they're making your job harder, even though they're paying you. So let's just give a few examples first, and then we'll talk about maybe how to deal with some of these things in general. So some of the things could just be as simple as unfortunate family dynamics. Maybe there's a lot of siblings and they don't all see eye to eye on the type of care, or they're fighting for another reason, like their feelings are hurt about something that you don't know anything about. Sometimes it's greed. Sometimes it's unknown family history. The only client is the person now. You don't know what kind of mom or dad they were to their kids, and that can cause all kinds of fighting within the family. And so sometimes just that bickering back and forth could involve your caregivers or even you as an administrator and make things very complicated. So that's one example. I recently got a report of a family that was unhappy with the assisted living facility that their mom lived in. So they hired an agency to go in and would not really allow the agency to provide the care that they felt their mom wasn't getting from the facility. They literally just hired the agency to tattle or to snitch on the facility. They wanted them to write down every time they called and how long it took for somebody to come and answer the bell, but they didn't want the staff to provide the care. And that's certainly counterintuitive for the caregiver. They're not being hired to be, a tattletale, and, maybe they could get security cameras for that. But it went so far as the family even holding a meeting with the facility administrator and the agency administrator and almost pitting them against each other. So that facility was never going to get a referral. I mean, that agency was never going to get a referral from the facility. And the facility was just bitter and angry about the agency and all of the caregivers. And it was just such a miserable situation. So that kind of thing does happen, though. And it's important to draw boundaries at the very beginning and use your gut in regard to whether or not you're even going to take a client like that whenever you first get that phone call. Maybe there's a mental illness that's unaddressed with a family member who either lives in the home or comes around all the time, or maybe is part of the primary care team for the client. You could see aggressive or unpredictable behavior, maybe verbal aggression, like yelling at your caregivers with, not that there's ever cause to really yell at someone, but just maybe unprovoked aggressive behavior could be an issue. I've even seen situations where a family member does have cameras all over the house and they're constantly watching them and nitpicking and micromanaging the caregivers and even harassing them. That does feel like harassment to caregivers who think that they're doing the right thing. You're always going to want to tell your caregivers if the family has cameras in the home, so that they're aware and they don't feel surprised if they get called out on something, and kind of keeps everybody honest. But in a situation like that, geez, if the family is spending all their time watching the cameras anyway, maybe they should be providing more of the care. So that can be really tough and tough to support your caregivers in a situation like that. There's always situations like maybe a family member is on drugs or has guns or, shows any manner of inappropriate behavior, could create a hostile environment for your caregivers to work in. And you can lose those caregivers real quick if you don't know what's going on. So having an open line of communication with your caregivers and making sure that they feel comfortable telling you when something makes them uncomfortable in the client's home, very important, vital even. Sometimes the family's direction to the caregivers will contradict the agency's direction, and the caregivers will get stuck in the middle saying, oh, I don't think I'm supposed to do that per the policy or what my boss said, but the family's asking them and they're right there in front of them, and it's hard for them to refuse care. So be mindful if your caregivers overstep in that way, that before you blame them, that you find out what the situation was, because a lot of times they feel stuck and don't always feel like they have a choice. And then give them some tools on how to have choices, like some maybe phrases to say, like, let me just call the office and make sure that's okay. And then they can put, the onus on you as the administrator or the owner to advocate for them or go back and tell the family no, and they don't have to be the ones to say no. That could make things a little easier for them. Sometimes, though, a family will manipulate your caregivers or even bully them into doing things you wouldn't allow. And so, again, having those discussions, maybe at orientation, or once you've learned that a family might have a tendency to do that, making sure that all the caregivers are aware, I've got your back, but you've got to use these tools and these phrases. You've got to call me and let me know. Let it be my job to keep the family in check. And you do what, is in your job description and what you're allowed to do, because it is your job to advocate for and protect your employees. They don't get paid enough to deal with these complex family dynamics and manipulation and being caught in the middle of these things. And they're already going to a little bit. It happens, especially when there's an end of life situation, and grieving families can be even more difficult. Rationale oftentimes just goes out the window when people are hurting. So be mindful of that. But it's not in their pay grade. It's not their responsibility to have to deal with these things. And you're going to need to advocate for them. And the worst thing, it could be that they just quit. And then you've lost a really good caregiver simply because you didn't either pull them out of a situation that they shouldn't have been handling, or you didn't advocate for them, or they didn't feel heard, or they didn't believe that they really could come to you with things like that. I'm going to ask you to refer back to a video from a couple of months ago called Tough Conversations with Clients, and have those tough conversations. You've got to step in and have those conversations. Or even you could refer the family to a social worker if there is a home health or hospice involved. Medicare does pay for a social worker, and I've oftentimes had to call a social worker at an agency and say, hey, this is going on here, and we've hit a wall on our side. If you could maybe step in, and maybe they'll hold a meeting with the family. Sometimes you can even refer a family to an aging life care professional. They're very good at mitigating those complex and tough family dynamics, and they may be able to help mitigate these issues. The last thing is, I'm going to tell you to know when to say when. Okay? Not every client is going to be right for you. Just because they're paying you money doesn't mean that you have to put up with anything, because you don't. And I want you to consider the amount of administrative time that you're spending, the energy that you're spending, the feeling that you get every time you see them calling on the phone. Also, how much time you or your office staff are spending restaffing, how many caregivers you may have lost because of a tough caregiver, a tough client. Sometimes it's just not worth it. So refer out if you can. Give those resources when it's time to say, no, I can't do this anymore. We've been through too many caregivers, or we've had these conversations and it's not getting better. But consider also that you may be just making space and time for a better client, for the right client for you, who's going to be respectful of your rules and your staff and what they can and can't do. And just there's much better situations out there. So just because you're getting money doesn't mean it's always the best thing. So do what's best for yourself and for your staff, and also for your clients. And sometimes we're not always the right fit, but I hope things can go well. A lot of times these problems can be solved with conversation, and I hope the best for you. Thanks a lot.